Hi everyone, my name's Angela and this is Paperbacks Galore, and today I wanted to talk about all of the 2023 Goodreads new releases on the list that I've read. A lot of people really hate the Goodreads Choice Awards because it's basically just a popularity contest, and I totally get that. I just think it's fun that there's this like one reader voted awards thing that we all talk about every year and vote in. And I definitely think that the books that are popular aren't necessarily the best, books of the year, and there's definitely a real lack of diversity in some of the, what are they called? Categories, which is a real shame and makes me want to scream even louder about the books that I love that aren't written by straight white authors. So I wanted to start with a book that I'm currently reading, which is in the young adult fantasy category, I think is what it's called, and this is What the River Knows by Isabel Ibanez. This is a Egyptian adventure story with some romance and some light magic. Our main character, Inez, is the daughter of two, they're not really archaeologists, they're kind of like adventurers, and they have literally never let her go to Egypt with them. They're very kind of secretive and mysterious about what they're doing in Egypt, and she feels really neglected by them. And unfortunately, at the beginning of the book, her parents pass away, and she goes to Egypt to get some answers. So right now, where I'm at in the book, the adventure is really starting. The first, I'd say 100 pages are kind of her traveling to Egypt and staying in this really beautiful hotel, and now we're kind of in the adventure part where we're there on a boat in the Nile, and it's really fun. I would say I'm just a tiny bit bored. I wish there was more about Egyptian mythology and history and like more adventure, but so far I'm enjoying this, but I don't think it's gonna beat the book that I voted for in the young adult fantasy category. Alright, let's start in the fiction category. So, unfortunately, I have only read 2 of the books in the fiction category. I am not a huge new release reader. I really should focus on the books that I actually own, but inevitably, Mittens, please don't knock over my tripod. Inevitably, there are always new releases that catch my eye, and so I get them from the library, or I listen to them on audio from Scribd or from my library. So the first one is Mame by Jessica George, which is a story about a young woman in her 20s living in London, and she has to take care of her ailing father who has health problems, and basically she's never really gotten the opportunity to live like a normal 20-something, and she finally starts taking some initiative in her life to try new things. So we're seeing her dealing with her family, dealing with like a shitty workplace situation, dealing with romantic situations for the first time, and overall I felt like what's the main character's name? Maddie was a great main character. She felt like a real person. She wasn't like extremely flawed and awful, but she also wasn't like perfect. She was kind of just this really effortless blend of different characteristics that made her feel like a real person that the author was like writing about, even though she's a fictional character. And I think it takes a lot of talent to do that. I think my problem with the book, which I ended up giving 3 stars, was just that it was kind of boring. Nothing about it really like blew me away or kept me super engaged or made me think really hard. It was just like fine. I think it mostly has to do with my taste. I am not someone who likes reading general fiction about people just kind of like living their lives very often. It's just not something that appeals to me. So for this one, it was a bit boring, but I think for people who like contemporary fiction, this one was a very successful read. So I did not vote for Mame, but I do think it's a good book, just not a book for me. And the other fiction nominee that I read also on audiobook is Yellowface. Obviously this one is super popular. R.F. Kuang has had like such a boost in popularity over these past, I mean, mostly since like Babel came out and people were talking about Babel. Weirdly enough, I loved Yellowface and I didn't love Babel, even though I thought Babel was going to be like the perfect book for me. But anyway, Yellowface. Basically, we have these two authors who are frenemies, Juniper and Athena. And Juniper is a writer who has not found much success, and Athena is a writer who has found a tremendous amount of success, and she is like a literary darling. She's a bestseller. She gets all of these awards and accolades, and Juniper pretty much hates her but also envies her and wants to be like her. And when Athena dies in this like weird kind of funny circumstance, Juniper decides to steal the manuscript that her friend was working on. And not only does she steal it, she edits it and like passes it off as her own original work. And it's just all kinds of fucked up, especially since the book is about like Chinese laborers in a certain war. I don't know, World War I maybe. It's like a very, like, obviously coming from a very particular perspective from Athena. And obviously Juniper has like no understanding of Chinese culture, of the Chinese language, like literally nothing. And you see in the book just how fucked up it is that she's doing this, and she just keeps getting away with stuff, and you're like, there's no way she's gonna get away with this. And she just keeps getting away with it, and it's really a mindfuck because you're in Juniper's perspective the whole time, and you see how she justifies all of these racist, manipulative things that she's doing, and you're like, this is awful, but like, I see how she twisted it, but it's still awful, so it's kind of a mindfuck. I gave Yellowface 5 stars. I listened to it literally in the course of like an afternoon and an evening in the same day. It was amazing, and I think it's gonna win, and I'm happy with that. Well, I have not read anything in the historical fiction category, so we're gonna move on to the next category. I have also not read anything in the mystery and thriller category, which sucks because it's one of my favorite genres, especially mysteries. There is one that I'm thinking I'm gonna get to on audio before the last round of voting, which is Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers. And all I know about that one is it's like an old lady solving murders, or maybe she's helping people murder people. I don't know, but it sounds fun and adorable. Next up is the romance category, which, as others have noticed, is weirdly white and straight. There's like hardly any representation in this category, and it really sucks. I have only read 3 of these. They were all releases by authors that I've loved in the past, and I was really looking forward to these releases. So the first one is Happy Place. I gave Happy Place 5 stars. It was probably my second favorite Emily Henry. I think Beach Read still beats out Happy Place. Basically, Happy Place is about these 2 characters who were in a very serious relationship for years, and they have recently broken up. And all of their best friends who they met in college live in different places around the US, so it's pretty easy for them to keep the fact that they have broken up from their friends. And they really don't want to ruin their annual friends trip to this like seaside lake house cottage. So they basically pretend that they haven't broken up. And obviously that brings up a lot of emotions and feelings and weirdness and sexual feelings. So it's just a really great read and an emotional read, but I did not vote for it. I voted for, well, I'll tell you the next book first. So I also read The True Love Experiment, which is the sequel to The Soulmate Equation by Christina Lauren. I haven't been saying any authors' names, sorry. Christina Lauren is like an author duo. Anyway, in this book we're following Fizzy, who is a romance author, and honestly she is one of my favorite characters in a romance novel ever. She is just so fun and confident and funny and bouncy, and like, I mean, just her name, Fizzy, I think really encapsulates her personality. So within the true love experiment, Fizzy is a romance writer, and Connor, the love interest, is like a director, a filmmaker. And his company is like, okay, we need more money. We can't just keep making these like nature conservation documentaries. We need something that's going to make us money. Let's produce a dating show. And so he is kind of in charge of this new dating show, and Fizzy gets picked to be the leading lady of this dating show, and obviously they fall in love, and it was very fun and cute, and I gave it 4.5 stars. I would highly recommend the audiobook, but I'm not voting for either of those two books because by far my favorite romance book of the year, I mean new release romance book of the year, is Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. This book is so good. Basically we have two doctors, and what's the girl's name? Brianna. So Brianna and Jacob, and Brianna has been working at this hospital for a long time. She is coming out of a bad marriage, getting divorced. She's getting divorced, and Jacob is a very anxious boy, and he is new at this hospital, and he makes a really bad first impression on Brianna, and she thinks that he is a complete jerk when really it's just like a misunderstanding. And so in order to try to clear up this misunderstanding and like make people understand that he's not a jerk, he starts writing her these letters, and they start writing letters back and forth, and eventually Brianna agrees to be his date to his brother's wedding. His brother is actually getting married to his ex-girlfriend, to Jacob's ex-girlfriend, and so his whole family is like, oh my god, Jacob, you're so pathetic, like we feel so sorry for you, and Jacob really hates that. So he's like, if I show up with a hot girlfriend and pretend like I'm madly in love, then they're gonna know that I'm happy and I'm okay, which he's not really that okay. And they're gonna get off my back. And so there's fake dating, there's letter writing, it's also a workplace romance. There's a bit, I mean, it's not really rivals to lovers, but in the beginning she really dislikes him for a little bit, so there's like a hint of that. And this book just made me cry. The emotions that these characters feel, and like things that they've been through, things that they experience with their mental health, and like their relationships with other people, were just so well done and realistic, and like made you just like care so much for the characters, especially Jacob. Like, I love Jacob so much. So obviously I gave this book 5 stars, and I voted for it, and I'll vote for it again. Hopefully it makes the next round. Oh my gosh. But I think we all know that Happy Place is probably gonna win the whole category, just because Emily Henry is like a beast that cannot be stopped. And I'm not mad at that. I mean, I gave Happy Place 5 stars. It just, there's like, it's like 5 stars, 5 stars, you know, like they're both 5s, but one of them is more to my taste. I have not read any of the romantasy books, which thank God they added a romantasy category, because now like the romantasy books can shine and the fantasy books can shine. So I'm glad they did that, but I'm not really much of a romantasy reader at this point, so let's move on to fantasy. I have 4 books to talk about in this category. First up is The Last Tale of the Flower Bride by Roshni Chokshi, and this book is not a fantasy book. I'm so sorry. I will go to my grave saying that this book is not a fantasy book. It is one of those books where there's like magical descriptions that make you feel like something magical is going on. There are references to magic, there are references to fae, but there's not actually any magic or fantasy element that happens in this book. It's just alluded to. And I guess you could argue that like the house is magical, but I personally don't think the house is magical. I think it's just like in their heads. I don't know. I just like, I'm so surprised that this is in the fantasy category. I didn't like this book very much. I gave it 2.75 stars. Basically, we're following, oh god, what's her name? The bridegroom, which is, you know, the man, the husband who never gets a name. And we're following Indigo. Indigo is this beautiful, wealthy woman with all of this knowledge about like myth and fairy tales and magic, and the bridegroom is a scholar, and they meet and they fall in love and they get married, and she makes him promise not to look into her past. So that's a very like classic fairy tale setup. So you think this book is going to be about their like sexy, beautiful, dangerous, mysterious marriage, but it's not. It's about a friendship between these two girls, Indigo and Azure, and the two perspectives that we get are the bridegroom and Azure. And Azure's perspective is in the past, talking about her friendship with Indigo when they're teenagers and this big, beautiful house that Indigo lives in. And it's about a toxic friendship. But like, I didn't sign up for a toxic friendship between two teenage girls. Like, that's just not what I want to read. So to me, this book was marketed as one thing and presents as another thing, and I think for a lot of people it was a really, really pleasant surprise and they loved it so much. The writing is beautiful, if not a bit much, you know, towards the end you kind of are like, okay, just get to the point. But it is beautiful, and it just wasn't for me. Everything that was happening, I was like, well, I'd rather it be about this. So I definitely won't be voting for The Last Tale of the Flower Bride. Next up is a DNF. It is Swordcatcher by Cassandra Clare. No. No. You know, I was reading this and I was like, yeah, this isn't bad. This is fine. This is, like, fine. And then I realized at some point, like, I am so bored, and this feels like a bad YA fantasy that I would have read when I was, like, 13, and would have been like, yeah, this is fine, and, like, not really thought about ever again. And it's, like, over 600 pages, I think. It was a library book, so proud of myself for DNFing this. I've seen some negative reviews that definitely were on the same track as like what I was feeling, so I don't think this book really would have like shocked me or surprised me in any way. And what was so annoying about this book was how like all of the magical kingdoms were like clearly based on real countries, like especially like Asian countries. Like there was one country that was clearly based on India, and like one that was clearly based on Korea, and I think there was like one clearly based on China. It was just like so unimaginative. Like she was just taking like Italy and France, you know, those kind of like inspirations, and like calling the country something else, and like just there was just like zero things that were unique. It was just bad. So definitely won't be voting for Swordcatcher. Next is one of my biggest disappointments of the year, and it is The Adventures of Amina al-Sarafi by Shannon Chakraborty. One of my favorite series of all time is the Daevabad trilogy. I love it so much. I want to reread them someday. I mean, it's just one of my favorite series. I think a lot of fantasy fans were really excited for this book, and a lot of people really loved it. I mean, I have not really heard a negative review of this book. The people who I've seen read it thought it was really fun, and you know, kind of a change of pace, and they liked the pirate adventure story. I don't know why I didn't like it, really. Like, when you tell me there's a pirate adventure story, it sounds fun, but it just wasn't fun for me. I was bored. I felt like the side characters were, like, supposed to be fun, but, like, weren't fun for me. Like, I thought they were boring. I thought Amina was an interesting enough character, but she wasn't really enough to carry the book for me. The first, like, a large part of the first part of the book, if that makes sense, just felt like historical fiction. Like, it took a long time for there to be an actual fantasy element of the book. and for me that made it feel really slow. So that book really disappointed me. I thought it was going to be 5 stars. I pre-ordered it. I should probably be holding it up, but it's over there and it's too late now to go get it. Yeah, unfortunately. And I think I'm going to unhaul it too, just because someone else will read it and really like it, and they deserve that. And the fantasy book that I read and really, really enjoyed is Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies by Heather Fawcett. This book is such a cozy, snowy, light academia, mischievous fairy sort of story. Basically, it's set in this fictional Scandinavian country, and our main character, Emily Wilde, is a scholar and a researcher, and she is trying to do field work and actually have encounters with fairies. She's trying to complete her Encyclopedia of Fairies, and she is unexpectedly met with her rival professor, Wendell Bamblebee. It's so hard to say his name. Bamblebee. And he is just a himbo. He's just hot. Like, it's like he doesn't really do much scholarly work. He like has his grad students do things for him. He doesn't really care that much about like writing articles and writing books, and Emily is just like so frustrated with him but also charmed by him, and there is a romance element to this book. But yeah, it's just this like small community who's like helping them, and they are encountering these really mischievous, strange fairies, and it's very snowy and cold. There's a dog character. Like, it's not really a character, the dog doesn't like talk or anything, but there's a dog, and that's fun, and it's just like whimsical and lovely. Like, those are the 2 words. If you're looking for a whimsical, lovely read for the winter, I would highly recommend. I gave it 4.5 stars. It wasn't quite a 5 for me, but I did really enjoy it, and I will be voting for it. I don't think it's gonna win, but I really hope it makes it to the final round. Strangely enough, I have horror books that I read that are on this list. I'm not a huge horror reader, but I've read 3 of these books, which is kind of crazy. I think it's because a lot of my favorite like book influencers are horror readers, and I hear them talk about these books and I'm like, oh, I want to read that, even though it's not my favorite genre. So first up we have Vampires of Elnorte by Isabel Cañas. This is a story about our 2 characters, Nana and Nestor, who grow up as childhood best friends, and one night when they've snuck out to hang out, Nana is attacked by these creatures, which obviously turn out to be vampires, and she looks dead, and Nestor is terrible. He carries her body to her family home, and Nestor realizes that her father is going to kill him. Like, if he brings home his dead daughter, he is going to be beat within an inch of his life. So this kid is terrified, so he brings Nana to the house and then he runs away and he never returns. And little does he know that Nana has actually not died, but she was just in like a state of being frozen. And she grows up into a beautiful young woman, and she is wondering why her childhood best friend ran away and never came back. So obviously these 2 are going to meet at some point in this book. Throughout this book, people from the United States are invading Mexico, so there is a war. Obviously there are these vampires, there's a romance element, there's also a class element. I'm talking about this as if I really loved it. I didn't. I gave it a 3.5. I think the synopsis sounds a lot more exciting than the actual book, which is why I was a bit disappointed. Isabel Cañas has a tendency to like really give you the characters' inner thoughts, their inner monologues, like over and over again, and they're having like very similar emotions. So I'm like, Mittens. Sorry, my cat really wants to play. Yeah, I was bored because of all of these descriptions that Isabel Cañas was giving us about their thoughts and their feelings, and I just needed it to move quicker. Next up is Lone Women by Victor Laval, maybe? This is a story about a young black woman named Adelaide who is moving to Montana on her own to basically be a homesteader, and she is leaving her family home in flames, and she's carrying a trunk with her. And throughout the book, obviously we're curious about what's in the trunk, and obviously at some point it's revealed what's in the trunk, and it's just this isolated story of, you know, Adelaide trying to survive in this very brutal circumstance where she's kind of isolated and alone and trying to survive in the cold in this little house shack. And there's like a small community that she gets involved in. I don't want to spoil like what kind of horror it is because I think that's one of the reveals. I think I would have liked this book better as a historical fiction rather than a historical horror. The horror element didn't go far enough for me, so unfortunately this one disappointed me a little bit, but I do think that this author has a really incredible writing style, and like his mind is so interesting, so I would definitely read more from him, and I ended up giving this 3.5 stars. And the book that I voted for, that I gave 4 stars, is Monstrilio. Monstrilio by Gerardo Samano Cordova. Sorry, that was not great pronunciation, and my cat is being very chaotic. Monstrilio is the story of a couple grieving the death of their young son. He dies from complications with an illness that he has having to do with his lungs, and when he dies, his mother Magos cuts out a piece of his lung, and eventually she feeds this lung some chicken broth, and it actually grows into a monster. And so we're following different people in Magos's life, like her husband, her friend, and then eventually we do get Monstrilio's perspective. It's very interesting how they treat the monster that is Monstrilio and how he evolves, and this kind of look at parenting and grief and wanting your child to be something that they simply are not. A lot of the characters are queer, and it's a very like casual queer representation. I thought that that was really, really refreshing for a horror book, and obviously like the themes around queerness were really interesting as well. The relationships between these characters were absolutely fascinating, and I gave it 4 stars. I read this for a virtual book club, and I didn't really expect to like it. So I did vote for that book, obviously. For the young adult fantasy category, I picked Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. It's the only book I read in the category, but it's one of my favorite books of the year. I gave it 5 stars. There's a war, there's gods, there's a newspaper office, there's rivals to lovers, there's trenches and found family. It's just a beautiful book. There's typewriters. The vibes are immaculate. The writing is wonderful. The characters are wonderful. The plot is engaging, and it's just such a great book. I really hope it wins, and I am so excited for the sequel. And for the debut novel category, the only books I had read were Mame, which I gave 3 stars, and Monstrilio, which I gave 4 stars, so I chose Monstrilio. I don't think it will win, but I think for a debut especially, it was really excellent. And last but not least, we have the memoir and autobiography category, and in that category I've only read one book, which is Page Boy by Elliot Page, and I gave it 4.5 stars. I thought the discussions of queerness and trans identity, friendship, relationships, Hollywood were all really, really fascinating. Elliot Page wrote this himself, and he is a very talented writer. I'd say the only critique that I had, and many people had, was just the non-linear timeline made it a little confusing to keep track of the details of his life. Sometimes he would like go back and forth, and it's been a while since I've read that chapter, so I don't really remember exactly where he is. So I don't think it necessarily benefited from the non-linear timeline, but I still thought it was excellent. It would be really wonderful if this book would win, because unlike a lot of the other celebrity memoirs on this list. Elliot Page wrote this himself, it's not ghostwritten, and also the trans representation would be amazing to see win, you know, an award. So I have high hopes for that one. And those are all of the 2023 releases on the Goodreads Choice Awards that I have read. There's a chance that I might read a couple before the final round. Let me know if there's any Goodreads award nominees that you have read and loved or hated or thought were okay. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a lovely week. Bye!